Hi, I'm Lori Roberts. I'm your host for Historically Speaking, and today we have got a really interesting show, especially if you are from the Bedford area. You will recognize my guest. You will also recognize maybe even the name of the person we're going to be talking about. Let me introduce my guest first, Nancy Peabody. Welcome.
Thank you.
So glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
Nancy and I taught together at Shawswick for a few years, and we'll get into the story of how we got kind of tangled up into this topic. But today we're going to be talking about a regiment during the Civil War that was from the Bedford area. And so some of you may even have some relatives that are connected to the Indiana 27th. And so I'm going to give a little brief history about the Indiana 27th, and then Nancy has brought a wealth of information. I mean, I'm sitting over here ooh and ahhing over all the things you brought today, because it is rare that families have this much history, and she has the mother lode. So I'll get us started by just talking. First of all, the Indiana 27th was a volunteer infantry unit, and so after the attack on Fort Sumter, Lincoln called up the 75,000 troops to join in putting down, as he called, the insurrection. And so Indiana was one of the first states to come to the aid of the Union by sending several volunteer attachments. And one of them was from here, and it was the Indiana 27th, and it had several companies involved with it. And we'll talk more about those here in just a minute. But as a volunteer infantry unit, the state government had the initial responsibility of giving these people clothing to wear. And so the state of Indiana provided certain accoutrements and also clothing. And one of the things they provided was a 9-button short coat. And behind me is not a 9-button, but it was a later coat that would have been adopted, and it was a 4-button coat. And again, these coats were out of wool. So, you know, just think about that in this heat. Most had cloth epaulets and lay-down collars, but not all. Pants for the enlisted men were light blue, and I have an example of those behind me here, federal blue. The officers wore dark blue trousers also with thin piping, they believed to be of light blue. The hats were patterned on the McDowell model of a forage cap, and that's one thing I didn't bring today was the forage cap. I forgot that at school. They also had an oil cloth havelock. I'm not sure what the havelock was. That's new to me. They also had soldiers that wore slouch hats. So slouch hats kind of fit, you know, kind of down. The brim would have been down during the early period. Later photographs have them more of the kepi hats as headgear. Issuing these uniforms came to the task of the governor, Governor Oliver Morton, and his initial call had 55 regiments of infantry and several batteries of artillery. The 27th was a challenge because of their height. And if you notice the book here in the front, The Giants in the Cornfield, this regiment on the whole was known as the Giants because of their height. And one in particular, David Van Buskirk, he was from Bloomington, by the way, and there was several brothers, the Buskirk brothers. He was 7 feet tall. And his company F contained 35 men that were 6 feet tall or taller. And of this regiment, 60 men were over 5'10". And when you think the average man was about 5'9", 5'8", they would have been giants, very much. Lincoln at that time, I think he was 6'3", and he was considered extremely tall. So the regimental history attests that each company had at least half their men of such height. This meant that the regiment was at least an inch taller than the average man in most of the regiments of the Civil War at that time. They also had a problem fitting them into shoes. Now these are regulation, type brogans, leather up, the uppers, or suede kind of uppers, and then the leather hobnail soles. The average man wore about a size, at that time, probably about a 6 or 7, and these men were about 3 to 4 sizes larger than the average man. So their feet were already cramped inside the shoes when they received them. So needless to say, their uniforms did not fit properly. And so when their eventual uniforms arrived, they finally were able to get in and have the uniforms that they needed. People started to receive their accoutrements, and one of those things was a haversack. It was an oiled leather sack. I don't know, my husband, I tease him when he carries, it's like a man bag. They carried those. Everybody would have been given something called a housewife, and the housewife was your home away from home, because you would have had to sew everything yourself. So safety pins had been invented, so you would have had a safety pin, or 2 or 3 or a dozen. You would have had your own little thread that would have been attached. You had some of them had these little scissors with kind of like a razor blade in with them. And then of course you had various patches, which would have been something you carried. And again, you would have gotten this when you mustered in. You would have also got a New Testament. Most of the preachers would come out and make sure that all the soldiers would have been given a New Testament. You would have gotten writing paper, envelopes. They wanted soldiers to write home. That was important. And then a couple of these other things we'll talk about here in a minute, because they'll be more apropos to what you're going to talk about. So we get the Indiana 27th together, and the regiment would have different flags. So this is one of the flags from the regiment that they would have had. And I believe one of these is down at the Historical Society. If I'm not mistaken, there's a large Indiana 27th flag. This also is one of the flags of the Indiana 27th. 34 stars on the flag, but also the battles that the 27th would have fought in, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. The stats for this regiment, there were 100 enlisted men and 3 officers, one of which is going to pertain to Miss Peabody. And the members of each rank, there were 12 officers. Non-commissioned officers were 43. Other enlisted were 112, which gave this total regiment the size of 167. Of those men, 17 were married and 27 were single. The average height, and this is of all the Indiana 27th, was 5'8". The average age was 23 and a half. Of the officers, the average age was 28. I can't imagine being 28 years old and being in charge of a regiment. Most of them, 94, were farmers. And from this area, that makes a lot of sense. They would have been farmers. Stonemason, I thought there would be at least half, 1. From this area. Now, Indiana had, 55 different regiments to start, and so you would have had them from Springville and Leesville and whatnot. But that to me was quite interesting, that only 1 would have been a stonemason. The other things we're going to look at here in a minute are what it cost these guys. Usually when they signed up, they got a pay of anywhere from $9 to $13 a month. That was, and this, I know the South gave a bonus, sign-up bonus, like $50 if you joined for a year. The average enlistment for Indiana, I believe, was 3 months, because they were quite sure 3 months would have been plenty of time to whip the rebels, which is, kind of what was going on the other end of the spectrum. But let me show you who we're talking about today, and this is Thomas K. Box.
J. Box.
Thomas J?
J.
I am so sorry.
That's fine.
It was a misprint on my fault. Thomas J. Box. And Thomas J. Box is Miss Peabody's great-great-grandfather. So I'm going to let you just kind of tell us a little bit about him, what you can maybe tell us, and then we'll start looking at some of the neat things you brought about
Okay.
his battles and whatnot.
Okay. I really was not very familiar with Thomas Box. Would this be a good time to talk?
Yeah, we'll just.
We were cleaning out my brother's house I'd say about 4 years ago, and I came upon this box of all these old papers. And so I started looking through them. They all had to do with Thomas J. Box. And I thought, So I gathered them together, brought them to school, showed them to Lori, and said, Lori, I have no idea. What is this stuff? Well, I thought she was going to faint. She sat down. She said, you don't have any idea what you have here, do you? And I said, not a clue. I didn't even know who Thomas Box was. And come to find out, he was my great-great-grandfather. And he was the only Lawrence County soldier who was ever awarded the Medal of Honor. Not a clue. My family hadn't talked about him. I knew nothing about him. So after that, I went and talked to my father about it, and he said, oh yeah, he's very famous, and he was telling me a little bit about it, but he really didn't know too much about Thomas Box. But the one thing he did know is he was the only Lawrence County recipient of the Medal of Honor. Now, my father was Robert M. Lee. May I?
Yes.
Okay. And this is a picture of my dad. We went to Green Hill Cemetery and we found Thomas Box's grave. And this is a picture of my dad by the headstone. Or I guess the stone who puts those out?
Well, the government issues those, but he belonged to the GAR. And so he would have had a little bronze, maybe star that they also placed on the.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so my dad's Robert M. Lee, his dad's Robert B. Lee, his dad, A.J. Lee, and A.J. Lee married the daughter of Thomas Box, Emma Box. And A.J. Lee later on became the sheriff of Lawrence County. But so Thomas Box is my great-great-grandfather through my father's side.
Now you said, and I showed a picture of his medal. Do you have the commendation where it was written down?
Yeah, this is the paper that he received along with the medal. We have no idea where the medal is. But this says, herewith I enclose the Medal of Honor, which has been awarded to you by the Secretary of War under the resolution of Congress approved July 12, 1862, to provide for the presentation of Medal of Honor to the enlisted men of the Army and volunteer forces who have distinguished or may distinguish themselves in battle during the present rebellion. Please acknowledge its receipt. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, I cannot read the Townsend maybe, assistant
It looks like
general.
E.D. Townsend.
Townsend maybe, and it was written at the bottom in handwritten, Captain Thomas Box, Company D 27th Indiana Volunteers.
And they were known as the Lawrence Rifles. That was their nickname, the Lawrence Rifles. Yeah.
I am learning a lot. Since I said I knew nothing, Lori's been educating me a little bit on this. Well, so I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for bringing that. So, all right, so when Thomas enlisted, there's a neat story you told me yesterday about the story about him enlisting.
Well, he was 27 years old when the Civil War began, and he was a farmer here in Lawrence County. And when he heard about the Civil War and about the Union needing troops, the story goes, and I'll say that a few times today, but the story goes he was out in the field plowing and he just put the plow down and went and enlisted in the Union Army. And that's the story. Yeah. But that was in the summer of, what would have been, 1861?
It would have been 1861, so it would have been May.
May, yeah, summer. So he was probably plowing his cornfield. So.
That's interesting. Now, when he went to fight, I know that we talked just a few minutes ago that the Union Army you would have kind of walked through an assembly line type thing, and there would have been a stack of the long johns that you would have gotten. You would have gotten a pair of pants. You would have gotten the shirt behind me. You would have gotten the brogans. You would have gotten the haversack, the cap, where you would have kept your caps. and then you would have got a cartridge box, and the cartridge box, you would have gotten, and oh my goodness, I wish I had Norm here, because
Oh.
Norm could tell me all this stuff. You would have had your paper cartridges with the gunpowder, I think, and the bullets, which were 50, most of them were 50 caliber mini balls, but you would have gotten your artillery and all that from your, I guess it'd be your paymaster, or no, that's
I'm
you
not
got paid.
sure what the,
I know, ordnance
from the
person.
ordnance stores.
Yeah.
So.
And so you have, and this is just like, oh, ooh, we're trying to look at your stuff, but you have the actual pay for what he would have had to pay for each item.
And this says this is a receipt for issues to Thomas J. Box, and this was when he was a first lieutenant.
Okay.
So as after he was in it, this is the 31st day of October in 1863.
So he'd already been enlisted for two
yeah.
years and would have had to buy his. So can you tell what's, I
It's
know,
in
bless
pieces.
heart, it's all.
Okay. It says a Springfield rifle, muskets, complete. And it says 19, and I'm not sure we figured out what that
No,
meant.
I don't know what that meant.
So,
But-
and then he got bayonet scabbards, pouches, and some picks, cartridge boxes, 4 of them.
Oh, so that would have been 4 of these? Or maybe 4 boxes
Maybe
with
to put-
cartridge?
Yeah. And-
Gotcha.
yeah, I have no idea. Gun slings, waist belts, 2 of them, a ball screw, screwdrivers, and some kind of wrenches, a vise, tumbler and barrel spring punch, wipers, elongated ball cartridges, percussion caps,
Okay, now that's what would go in here.
percussion caps, not sure, cones, and some kind of springs.
Now, can you look back up, what kind of gun, was it a Springfield?
Springfield rifled musket.
Okay, and that's what this is. And this is out of a book that I had put together some years ago about the different things that the Indiana 27th had, and that's what this is right here. That's
Okay.
the type of gun that they had. Very cool. All right, now, on the one I have, it's 1864, and it would have told what their items cost. And
Yeah, I'd be interested.
and it's kind of interesting because by 1863, yours tells about like vice, by then things were breaking. Things they had to repair, and they had to repair those on the fly because they couldn't just send guns back and say, oh, I need a new gun. You either picked it up off the ground with somebody who had died, or you learned how to fix what you needed. And so those things would have come in quite handy. The hat that I didn't bring, doggone it, was $1.80. Now this came out of your pay, by the way. The forage caps were 65 cents. The pants back here would have been $3.10.
Wow.
The blouse, and that's what I thought was interesting, the shirt behind me, we call it a shirt, but I think the reason why maybe it's called a blouse is because you pulled it over your head. There's only 3 buttons on that. You had your drawers, which is your long underwear. You would have probably been issued those at the beginning, but then later you probably would have had wool,
Gee.
long handles. They also issued flannel shirts, and those were $1.57. Your stockings, which were your socks, and it doesn't say how many they usually got. Does it say on his?
I don't even see stockings on this one.
Okay, 35 cents. And usually I would think they would want to have at least 2 or 3 pairs in their haversacks, because if you're an infantry soldier, you had to take care of your feet. You had to, because you were marching. Shoes sewed, that means a stitched sole, which is what these are, hobnails. And they're pegged. These would cost you $1.68. Your coats were $10.50. Your boots were $3 1/4. This was like a sack coat is what this was, and I do not see that on here. So I'm going to say you would have probably had to pay somewhere around $4 for that, because the frock coat, the long officer's coat, that was $8.75. So that was high dollar.
And how much did they get paid a month?
13.
Oh my gosh.
I think, well, depending on your rank,
Sure.
$9 to $13. And some
Wow.
months, you know, you had to wait. Then you had to pay for your blanket. It was $3.75. And then these oiled cloths, and this was oiled, and it's kind of been through the mill, so some of the oil has already come off. But you would have got an oil blanket, and that was waterproof. So that's why you had that. And then you had a rubber blanket. That was $2.55. And then, like I said, your cotton underwear there was 89 cents. So you might want to have a couple pair, because I don't know about you, but I would have probably
change
needed
mine.
a couple.
Oh, yeah.
I would have needed a couple after I saw the elephant. You know, I would have been scared. And for those of you that don't know, saw the elephant, if you're seeing the elephant, that means you're going into battle for the first time. So yeah, change of underwear
You
probably
bet.
would have been important.
That's probably the least of their worries, but yeah.
Exactly. All right, so what else do you have that you can
To
show?
Well, let's see here. This is when he was discharged. This is actually a handwritten paper saying that, yes, that he has been honorably discharged from the Army. And this was dated June 16th, 1913. So that was a little bit after the fact, but he probably needed official paperwork to receive his pension or something.
Exactly.
And this is actually a copy of his pension papers, and he received pension of $30 a month.
Which would
$30
probably
a
seem
month
like a lot.
pension.
And what year did he receive that? Does it
This
say?
is dated, I bet it's no date on it, just has a certificate number.
Okay.
So,
All right. And I'm not sure how old they had to be before they started getting their pensions.
oh, wait a minute, it does say the 11th day of May, 1904.
Okay. So,
And this pension being for gunshot wounds of left breast, left arm, right thigh, right leg, and left ankle.
so those we didn't even know
Wow.
about, because when we started searching, we knew about the, why don't you tell us about that,
About his,
about his injury?
well, he was in quite a few battles. It seemed like the Company D 27th Indiana participated in a lot of the major skirmishes of the Civil War. But the first battle that he was in, they were in Washington, D.C.
So they were in the Potomac,
They were in
Army
the
of the Potomac.
They crossed the Potomac. They engaged Stonewall Jackson's army in the Battle of Front Royal and Winchester. That was those were the first battles of his career. Then that was in March of '62, and in August of '62, he's now a first lieutenant. They were in the Battle of Cedar Mountain.
Okay.
And in the Battle of Cedar Mountain, he was taken POW. He was a POW. He was captured, became a POW. And because of that, he missed the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. And he was released when he was exchanged for a Confederate lieutenant. So he got out, and then the next thing that he that got out in time to participate in the Battle of Antietam
Okay.
in September of '62.
So Antietam, which was also known as Sharpsburg, was where the Indiana 27th also is very important. And General Lee had sent orders to his generals, and I was trying in my head trying to rattle off, and I know one was Stonewall Jackson, one was,
Hall, I think.
was it Hall?
Well, I'm not sure, but I thought I read that name somewhere.
The other was Harvey Hill, his
Maybe it was Hill then.
Stonewall's
Maybe it was Hill.
brother-in-law.
Yeah.
And I want to say Jeb Stuart, but you know how you think something and then you think, I should have looked that up. But there were three. And so Lee wanted those orders to be given. And so there were 3 cigars, and his special order 191 was wrapped around that. And so, do you know the story?
What I read is that the company was walking through where the Confederate soldiers had camp.
Yes.
And there were 3 soldiers walking along, and one of them spotted an envelope. Is this the story was this the facts?
Yeah, they were in an envelope.
Okay. And they opened it up, and first thing that happens is 3 cigars fell out, and 2 of the gentlemen were only interested in the cigars. And the third gentleman opened it up and said, well, let me see what it is, and saw what that was and thought that was important enough. He went to his commanding officer, who went and then finally gave him to, and you'll have to finish the story there. Okay.
The story that I got was almost similar to the point where when they had laid down for the night and he stretched his arm out, one of them, and see, I don't remember my memory, but
well, and we'll hear
felt,
many.
But he couldn't read. The one who picked it up couldn't read and gave it to the other fella, which is what you said, who read it, and then it went on. McClellan, who was was Lincoln's general, was not his favorite general because he always said he had the case of the slows because he just never acted. Well, here was a time when he could have, and could have really.
He knew Lee's plan of attack and could have.
And he didn't. He waited. And so the book that you brought, which I'm sure a lot of people by now have probably read or heard about, The Giants in the Cornfield. Now we're kind of getting to why they called them the Giants, because of their height. But the cornfield is where the Indiana 27th was positioned on the battlefield in Antietam. And the corn back then, I mean, we've all grown corn, and we know, that knee high by the 4th of July, it is more true now than it was back then, because corn back then didn't get more than 5 or 6 feet tall. So it would have not been the kind of corn, the hybrid variety that we have today that can go up to, 10 feet, at least. So when you see these giants coming down through the field, I mean, they're a good head above the corn. And so they, unfortunately, were easy picking. They could see them coming. So Thomas Box would have been in that battle. Was he a lieutenant?
He was first lieutenant in that battle.
So he was first lieutenant. Now, was he injured in that battle?
No, he was not.
All right. So
that I know. Like I said, I'm just learning.
Because he could have had those other injuries that we didn't know about. All right. So that battle was probably one of the bloodiest.
That's what I read.
I can remember being there by myself one time. I was at a conference and decided I would rent a car and drive out there by myself, and walking through, they call it Bloody Lane. It was a wagon road, and the soldiers, there was a picket fence on each side, and they were fighting back and forth. The bodies that fell as they kept trying to take that road, 3 deep, that you could walk from one side of the hill across. And so as I stood on one side and I looked up to the top of the hill, I just imagined what it would have been like, because some of the accounts I've read said the blood just ran down that wagon road like a river. I mean, there were so many people bleeding. But yeah, it was one of the bloodiest in the war. And so to think that the Indiana 27th, I mean, when I read the list of battles that they fought in, they were the major battles of the war. When we think of the major battles, they were there. So now see, that was in September of
1862.
So then, where did he go after that?
Well, he may have been injured because there's a gap, and the next one was Gettysburg.
So he would have been taken prisoner, because the next battles that he would have been in, major ones, were Fredericksburg, which would have been in December.
Okay.
Chancellorsville would have been in May.
Okay.
And that was the one that Jackson was friendly fire. His own men shot him.
Right. Okay.
So he would have missed both of those. But that one was probably good that he missed, because that was one of the South's, I mean, they routed the Union. So it was probably good for your granddaddy that he wasn't in that one.
Yeah.
So now he's been in a prisoner.
Yeah.
And
now we're in July of '63 for the Battle of Gettysburg.
All right. So the 27th was near, I think it was Spangler's Spring.
That I do not know.
I walked that. I do have a picture. This is where the Indiana 27th Regiment was. They charged with the 2nd Massachusetts, let's see, on July 3rd, Culp's Hill. They were on Culp's Hill, which was, Culp's Hill was really down below it was really marshy, and the picture that when I walked through Gettysburg, it was in July. It was hotter
hot
than
and
all
humid.
get out.
Well, that was July too, wasn't
And
it?
they said that during that battle as well, that it was real marshy. So those boys had to walk through that marshy to get up
Gee.
that hill. Now, what happened to Thomas during that battle?
He was wounded on the second day, and he was wounded when he did a nighttime charge against the Confederate position. The group he was leading, the unit he was leading, did a nighttime charge, and he was shot through the thigh.
Now, that amazes me that he was, and I know there was soldiers that were shot through, but how it missed an artery, how
know.
it missed the bone, that is amazing. Now, one of the things that I just thought was the coolest was when you were telling me how they think he survived that.
Right, because there was so many infections and people lost legs, and you wonder how he not only survived but didn't lose his leg. Well, and again, story goes that he crawled off to the side of the field and was under an apple tree, and it was raining, and the rain was coming off the leaves, and it hit his wound on his thigh. And it cleaned out the wound, it kept it clean enough that it kept the infection at bay until he could get some medical attention.
And that probably it was to his favor because we don't have the acid rain issues like we do today. And it was to his favor because there were so many men that were being taken to field hospitals, and the surgeons would use the saw.
Oh, yeah.
They would maybe wipe the saw and then start on the next. And so they were infecting, didn't realize it, but that was to his advantage, that probably the wound didn't have a chance to be infected with somebody else's.
Well, and we keep talking about how we're not saying lucky he was,
Right.
but there are so many things that happened to him and didn't happen to him, that he survived.
Yeah,
And there are so many didn't, and all the casualties.
And when you talk about the rain, that's the story, as I have studied other battles or when we have visited the battlefields. And almost every major battle, there's been a rain. And it's almost like, and I think it was Robertson that did a lot of work on Stonewall Jackson. He wrote that it was almost like God's way of just wiping clean, the battle and taking care of the battle and then, moving on. But I don't know. It's amazing to me that anybody who was shot survived. When I was showing the kids yesterday a .50 caliber, different bullets, and we passed those around, and I'm thinking, if that hit your body, it had to have, you can't imagine the damage they would have done. And then for him to be able to walk away, and several injuries, that's what's interesting.
Yeah. And found out a few more injuries, and I also found out that when he died, he still had 3 bullets in him.
No. Oh my gosh.
So, and I guess they figured out it was just more dangerous to try to get the bullets out than just to leave them where they were.
Yeah, and they were made of lead, so it's a wonder all that lead didn't.
And he lived till he's 81.
Exactly, exactly.
I don't know.
All right, so we haven't even got to the interesting part of his life yet.
Well.
So he leaves this is July of '63.
And he goes and recovers somewhere,
Okay.
and heals from his
hospital.
wounds. And then in the spring of '64, he joins Sherman's army on his march to the sea.
Okay.
And then there are skirmishes, little skirmishes, and then May of 1864 is the Battle of Resaca. And that is where he earned his Medal of Honor.
Okay, now, to earn a Medal of Honor, you had to do certain things. So what did your granddaddy do that he got that?
Well, he was on, they call it a skirmish line.
Okay.
Company D was on a skirmish line. And then the Confederate soldiers, their skirmish line was made up of the Alabama, whatever.
38th.
38th, I was going to say 34th. And so they were just kind of looking at each other and shooting and shooting. And finally, Captain Box just said, "Okay, men, let's go." So he took his pistol out because they were within pistol distance.
Oh,
Took
gosh.
his pistol out and just emptied his pistol and just kept firing.
That's
And
amazing.
when he did that, his men followed him. And during that time, the person bearing the Alabama flag was killed or, disabled. And so they got the flag, they captured the commander, and then they also got a lot of POWs. They captured the troops from the Alabama.
So when you think about the flag bearer, that person was in the front of the line in your formation. And the reason why they were so important, number one, you had to be able to see where your regiment was. But there was also an honor to carry that, and you did not want your colors to ever hit the ground. And so that's why so many of those men were shot. Number one, they were in the front. But two, somebody was always going to grab that flag so that it wouldn't fall on the ground. And I think at Gettysburg, this unit lost four, I can't remember. I think it was 4 flag and 4 were wounded to keep that flag as they were trying to, the day he was injured on Culp's Hill. Yeah. So that's amazing to me.
So that is why he earned the Medal of Honor.
So he earned that, and I believe I have a picture of that medal, if I've not already shown it.
I think you did.
Did I show it
think
at
so.
the beginning? Okay.
Yeah.
So the Medal of Honor, but then he also won another medal, which one was enough. But
Yeah, he was also years later awarded Indiana's highest military award, which is the Distinguished Service Medal. And it's for gallantry and heroism above and beyond the call of duty on the field of Resaca.
Now, yesterday, after
Am I saying that right?
Resaca.
Okay.
After we did that, I went back and looked in my files, and that's one that I haven't been to, but I know where it is. Beautiful cemetery. Beautiful. They've got it. It's in Georgia. Now, I went online and went on the you type in Civil War site, and then you go and you type in Medal of Honor winners. And so it goes back and it starts with the earliest medals. And so at the time of the Civil War, the type of medal that they received was new for that, the way I understood it, for the war. And there it was. I clicked. I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And there he was, Thomas. And it says he was buried in Bedford, Indiana. And I thought, well, that is so neat, because that, we are so interested in family history, but we just look everywhere to find things. If somebody says, hey, I've got this, you want it? I'll send you a copy. Oh yeah, a copy. I'm so tickled to have a copy. You're sitting here with the things that were issued by the actual people for the actual.
He touched it.
He touched it. I know, and I'm such a geek. I was like, I would have been, I almost fainted when I saw it. I couldn't believe you had it.
And hidden in a box, not hidden in a box, but in a box.
Preserved in a box.
Not talked about, but I think also at that time people came back, put these things away, and went on with their lives.
They did. A picture back here is of my third great-grandfather, and that's on my grandmother's side. That was her granddaddy, and his name was Francis Edelman, and he was in the 88th Indiana. He went, fought in the Potomac, came back, never spoke of it again. And they said that a lot of these men had brain fever. That was an ailment. I think it was PTSD.
Yeah.
And I think he suffered from it, and he would not talk about the war. Never knew that, we had somebody in the Civil War until my mom started asking questions. And she said, oh, I wish I would have asked more questions.
Yeah. And by the time I asked questions, everyone had passed. My dad was still alive, but he was in his 90s.
Right.
And he remembers the stories that you probably can't tell.
Yeah.
The
stories.
And he remembers, things like that. But he didn't really know a lot, except that he was a Medal of Honor winner.
That is amazing. So he captured the flag at Resaca. That was 1864. And then what do we know after that battle, after he won that medal?
He was also, he continued, on the march to the sea, and he was, the group was in, the company was, helped take Atlanta, and then shortly after that, he was mustered out. So he was sent home.
He was sent home before the war, actually, Appomattox Courthouse and all
Yes,
that would have
yes.
happened. So he was already back home.
Yes.
Now, put his things away. Was he married? He was married by then.
No,
No?
he did not get married until he went home. He went home, married Sarah, had 3 daughters,
Okay.
and one of his daughters was Emma Box, married A.J. Lee, and that's where the Lee name comes in.
Okay, so maybe Miss Lee had the medal, so we don't know.
We don't know. We have no idea.
Now, the other stack of things you have, which is even more interesting to me because after the war and Reconstruction, the soldiers, yes, the Southerners had a lot of bitterness because of the things they had to go through to get back into the, the country to, be accepted again. But the soldiers themselves, by the time the reunion started, now it was kind of a badge of honor that these men had gone through, survived, and were able, and the pictures that I see, they're shaking hands, they're, sitting down, they're laughing. I've got video of the 75th, and I have video of the 50th. And the 50th is more picture than it is because sound and picture had not been together. So they have audio, but they don't have them together. And they're, they're in huge camps of these battlefields, and they're all friends. They're sitting and they're talking. But you actually have things from the 50th that is just amazing.
This is...
And it's of Gettysburg, correct?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes,
This
I'm
is
sorry.
the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg program, and it's falling apart. But this is the program they followed. Who was going to speak? The host, Pennsylvania, camp accommodations. And then I also have a tag that is to be carried in your pocket during the reunion, and this is Thomas Box's tag. Don't know the purpose, don't know why, but this is the tag that he carried with him.
And could have been for their meals, to show that they were veterans or whatnot. But, I don't know about you, but when I set something down, it's either got food on it, it's got...
And look how pristine.
It's pristine.
And it says he was 79 years of age, he was 6 feet tall, and weighed 145 pounds.
Soaking wet.
Oh my gosh. But
that's amazing.
that's his ID.
That's
his
right
ID.
there. So he got that, and then what else did he get?
Well, and then they also, in Indiana, had reunions of the 27th. And so what I have is a program of the 8th annual reunion of the 27th Indiana, and it says that it occurred in the Opera House in Bedford, Indiana.
Now, do you know where that was?
I
Maybe
have
somebody
not a clue.
that's watching this, that's, it works at the Historical Society, can let us know, because I'd be
Yes.
interested to know where that was.
And his wife, Emma, was very big in getting the reunion going and very supportive. And when she passed away, there was a memorial in the paper, and it says, "To our worthy Captain T.J. Box. Members of Company D take this means of extending to him their sympathy in his sad hour of affliction. Resolved that the members of Company D will never forget the many kind favors shown them by Mrs. Box in their past reunions and the interest she took in the welfare of the company. Company D also realizes that it has lost one of its best supporters by the death of Mrs. Box. Be it resolved that we extend our sympathies to the family in their sad bereavement. Be it further resolved that a copy of these resolutions be sent to each of the county papers and one to the family of the deceased." The
And
committee.
they kept that? Wow.
So,
Now, I know you showed me a poem that we looked at the other day, and his daughter had written a poem about her father.
and it's really falling apart.
And
so.
that, you can just show that. I'm not sure
Okay.
if you can even...
It's called My Faded Flag. And at the bottom it says, "In memory of my dear father, Thomas Box, captain of Company D, 27th Infantry, Indiana Volunteers, a hero of the Civil War.
And you know, it's not like they didn't remember. I mean, they were honoring him, but it's like once that generation passed, then it was put away.
And I think it was also the reunions were a lot of not outsiders, but just that they got together.
Yeah.
They, you know, and it wasn't probably, you know, everybody come, you know, so they,
more of a picnic.
yeah, but I think that was probably very good for them to get together and be able to
Sure.
talk about things, so.
And then the little book that you brought.
This is a survivor's roster of the 27th Regiment Indiana Infantry, and this says 1892. And from what I think happened is every year they just kept track of the survivors.
And they issued a new book.
I think, because Thomas Box, Captain, Bedford, Indiana was there, and they may even have gone through and written notes about different things, like this says Barry, he was probably called Barry. Then there's some X's and lines through some names, so they may have died the previous year,
Yeah, and
you
just
know.
not in
Yeah, and I just think that was just a way to keep track.
And those little books, I know when we were at one of the battles, I think Sacramento in Kentucky, they, the Christian Society had little books that the soldiers would have got, and they were that size. So that's interesting that they had that. Is there anything else that you brought that you want to tell us about before we?
I can't think of anything.
Now, if you're wanting to pay respects to Civil War soldiers, they're in Green Hill Cemetery, and which is where your granddaddy
Yeah,
is.
you just have to go through, just if you take a walk through the cemetery, all you have to do is to look for those stones, and you'll see that it says, well, I guess it doesn't say what,
It says Captain, Company D.
but it doesn't say like Civil War or,
No, but you can almost tell because of the shape of the stone
and the date on
and
there
the
probably.
date. I know the Union were more round, and the Confederates had a more scalloped
Yeah.
stone. One thing too that I'm sure I didn't know about until getting involved with the reenacting was we actually had a prisoner of war camp here, a holding camp in Bedford,
I think I did know that.
and it's on Breckenridge Lane, or Road, I'm sorry.
Is that by
Breckenridge Road.
GM?
Yes.
Okay.
And there, several years, I know Norm Taylor and Greg Baker and Matt Miller and I know Annette Taylor, a lot of them put together, you know, where they would go and decorate the graves. And one year, I had bought some flags and I represented the southern part because there are 25 southern Confederate soldiers who were brought up from the Battle of Fort Donelson in Tennessee. They were too ill, they were burned, a lot of them, too ill to make it all the way to Camp Morton in Indianapolis or Camp Douglas. So they held them here in Bedford. Well, in the course of them holding them, they passed, and 7 Union soldiers who were guards or whatnot, they passed as well. So if you go to Breckenridge, there is a large monument that talks about this was Camp Lawrence and this, you know, was what happened. And then there's a monument like what your granddaddy has, and that one is 25 unknown Confederates, and then the Union stone is also there.
I did not know that.
And so one of the future shows, we're going to kind of talk about maybe this group of people and maybe try to get some closure for them and maybe see if anybody knows how we can get those boys back home. Because we know they were from Tennessee and we know they were from Virginia. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, GM, the parking lot, I believe, is about where that camp was. And when they put the asphalt down, that was the site, I'm pretty sure, of where Camp
I'll
Lawrence
have to go
was.
out there and look and see if I can
And
find that.
there's so many Civil Wars. Right now, my 8th graders are doing grave, you know, they're going out and decorating the graves. They're adopting a Civil War soldier, and they're going to put flowers on the graves for extra credit, but it's a good
that,
community
parents?
event. Yeah.
Hear that, parents?
Yeah,
That's
hear
right.
that, parents? No, but they know. They've been doing it, and they've been coming in, and they've been finding extra graves, and it's so pretty to see those poor stones that have been forgotten with beautiful flowers on them, and somebody remembers them and thanks them for their service.
Yes.
So,
Now, one other thing I do want to mention, my maiden name's Lee.
yes.
For years and years, and I don't know for a fact, but I was told I was a descendant of Robert E. Lee. So we had Thomas Box, Robert E. Lee. Who do I cheer for? You know?
I know.
But, and I have not factually found, you know, that I'm
Yeah.
actually a descendant of Robert E. Lee, but
Yeah, could be.
Could be.
I know. Stranger things have happened. But I want to thank you so much for bringing all your things, treasures to me. They're treasures, and just being willing to come and talk about it. You know. And
well, I want to thank you because, as I said before, you know, this is just, you're right, it's treasures, but it makes me, I said when I retired, going on 3 years, but when I retired, I'd have more time and I could look into this, and I really haven't yet, but I want to.
Yeah.
You know, I want to find out more about Thomas Box. I want to find out more if I'm actually related to Robert E.
Sure.
Lee. I want to find out all these things about my history.
Well, once I found out about this regiment, that was my mission, to go find where each of, you know, I had the list of the soldiers and where they were buried. And so whenever Doug and I would go to Shiloh or Gettysburg or Antietam, we would go to the Union Cemetery there, the Federal Cemetery, and I wanted to find, and I did. I found several of the graves, and Chardine was one of, I think Adam Chardine was one I remember, and I left some money. I left a penny on his headstone, and there were several that had money, and that was to show respect. There were pennies, there were nickels, and there were quarters. It depended on if you knew him, if you served with him, or if you were a family.
Okay.
So yeah, so don't take the money. If you
Gotcha.
see money
Yeah.
on anybody's headstone.
I'd seen that before and didn't know what it
Me-
represented.
As
so-
well, and I had to look that up and find out why they were doing that, because I thought, wow, I'm surprised there's money on, you know, somebody didn't swipe it. But there is good people and there are bad people. So today our guest was Nancy Lee Peabody, who brought her granddaddy Thomas, well, second great granddaddy,
Yeah.
Thomas Box's Civil War Indiana 27th memorabilia. And we're very thankful that you have that and
I'm
you
thankful
preserve
too.
that for future
Yeah.
future generations. Well, that's all we have for today. Our last show of this year will be about kind of the Gilded Age and some of the things that Indiana has to offer that you may not have known, some history things, and the guest that I'm going to be having is kind of going to be like you were today, the sage on stage, and bring what they have, and we'll just pick their brain and find out what it is. But if there's something that you really would like to know about for the next season, or you would like to have a show so you could learn more about it, drop us you know, a line on Historically Speaking, the Facebook page. My email will be at the end of the program, or you know, let the Star Station know if there's something in particular you really would like to know more about, and it doesn't have to be Indiana history, even though I don't know why anybody would want it.
There's so much.
There's so much. That's right. So I'm Lori Roberts. I'm your host for Historically Speaking, and thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. Have a good week.